Hello, everybody. Welcome. Fantastic to have you here. Thank you ever so much for your time. Really privileged and pleased to have a guest with me today. Her name is Kate Munday. More from Kay in a moment. Just before that, let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing, because I do think every day I say this, I think it's absolutely fantastic. So today we're live on LinkedIn, we're live on Facebook, we're live on YouTube, we're live on iTunes and Amazon Music and about 30 other streaming sites, and altogether that equals about somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 people. Now, Kay's obviously much younger than me, but I can remember when I wanted to do put a message out to people that involved, 7,000 stamps and 7,000 envelopes and several trips to the post office. How far we've come in the 28 years that I've been doing this. Absolutely fantastic. So today we're here to talk about two main subjects. One is communication, and the other is the utilization of stories within that communication headline, really. And Kay is an expert on those of these things. So welcome to the conversation, Kay. Thank you ever so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure, my pleasure. So just to kick off, tell everybody a little bit about you, your background, and what you do, please.
Yeah. So hello, everybody. Very excited to be here, definitely. And what do I do? So I'm passionate about helping people create their next chapter so that they can speak to inspire, basically. And I'm sure that's going to be a lot about what we talk about today. And why that's important. Why is it important to have a good story? In fact, I'm going to ask you first, actually, before I delve into more about me. Is it good to have a good story or to be a good speaker? Tell me, which one's more important, do you think?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, both are really, really important. If you've got a good story, but you're not very good at putting it over, there's issues there. Or the other way around, if you're really good at talking, but you talk a load of rubbish. But I think, probably the most underrated thing, in my opinion, is stories. When I spend a lot of my time listening to and learning from the world's leading sales and marketing experts, business growth experts, and they're all talking about stories and how important they are. And often they teach by telling stories about what they've done and what's happened and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's a difficult question, but both are incredibly important.
You are right, though, see. It's both, right? It is both. You do need both. And however, I have heard really good stories being told badly. Definitely.
Yes. Without doubt.
Predominantly, I think probably some of the worst stories that I hear people tell are, funnily enough, about themselves. Yes. And ultimately, like, we are experts in us, right? There's nobody better to tell our own stories than ourselves. So it's ironic, really. But that's really where I play into. We do look at all of the things that are needed in order to deliver an effective message. And ultimately, communication is where it lies, because apart from holding a gun to someone's head, which is a pretty good way to make somebody do something, communication is the second best. After that, it really is the best way to influence. And this is something that I really relate to, because did you know 75% of our population struggle with what they call glossophobia, which is actually speech anxiety? And that could be like a little bit of shyness to like this crippling fear of speaking.
Oh, I get this all the time with business owners, trying to get them to do a video for their homepage. It's like, extracting teeth sometimes. They hate, oh, no, I don't want to be on a video. Oh, no, I hate it. I hate listening to myself, and then you got the other side of it where they record it 48 times because it's not quite perfect. You get people who are, just never happy and sort of suffer with, perfection syndrome or whatever you call it. I'm not quite sure, but you do get that.
Is most of my clients who come to me are afraid of speaking. That's what they come. I've got a fear of speaking. And actually, when you dig beneath that layers and the surface, you find out it's not the fear of speaking. It is the fear of judgment from others. It's the
Yes.
fear
Yeah.
of like, what if I say something wrong? Or what if I look silly? Or what if people don't like me? That is the
Yes.
biggest fear.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's something that I can totally resonate with. So as I said, I'm a coach at the moment who works one-on-one with clients, and also
Yeah.
by running workshops one-to-many.
Okay.
And I
Right.
help both people and brands tell their stories. And I also do this for Google as well. So I work with our creative works team, and that is basically helping big brands, so like Nike and Samsung and all of these big boys, with their storytelling. And how do you do that more effectively on our YouTube platform?
Yeah.
And I
Very
think this is all a little bit ironic, really. I need to let you in on my story. So why I am here and delivering this, and I've got to where I am now today, is
Please.
because, funnily enough, communication skills were my weakest skill.
Wow.
And I would say that it was speaking was my number one fear. I definitely relate to that 75%. So I was this, like, imagine, like, small, very shy, very timid, introverted extrovert is what I'd say.
Okay.
Dyslexic child,
Wow.
born into a slightly dysfunctional, so should we say, broken family. We can probably relate to some degree, all of us there. And but communication was not our forte in our family. So I think I really struggled with communicating growing up. It really hindered me and my abilities to build relationships and friendships. And then when I got into the working world, I had these great ideas. Like I like really wanted, when you're in a meeting and you want to put up your hand, but you're like, oh, should I?
Or
Oh, I don't.
say something silly or ask a stupid question. Yeah.
And then there's that other person that puts up their hand and they go, oh, that's a really great idea. And it was exactly what you were going to say. I would have that all the time. I was going into meeting rooms where I had to prove myself, especially, I have to say, because of the way that I look, female, blonde, etc. I was going into boardrooms of middle-aged men running banking firms who took one look at me and were like,
and judge you as whatever. Yeah. I know.
And so I realized that this is something I have to nail. If I want to be successful in my own career, if I want to help others, if I want to, I've got these great ideas, but there's no good in my head. If I cannot communicate them effectively, then do they even exist at all?
One of the things I often say to businesses is that, the more people you talk to, the more money will end up in your bank. It's all very well, all this digital everything and all that sort of stuff, the world that we live in. But it's still ultimately about speaking to people. I remember, actually, I'll just tell you a very quick story myself. When I was a younger man, I used to play table tennis at international level. And one day I was doing an exhibition. It was actually down in Camber Sands at a Pontins holiday camp. And I was used to that. I was confident playing in front of people. I'd done it many, many times. But on this particular day, the guy who was the compere, literally 30 seconds before I was due to start the exhibition, got an emergency phone call and he had to go to reception. So he said, right, Steve, you've got to be the compere. And the guy said, right, I'll introduce you. And at that moment, I had to walk out in front of 5,000 people and talk for 40 minutes. I'd never spoken in front of a group before. And I always said, nothing could ever be worse. But I do hear that, speaking in front of people is like one of the biggest fears that people have. And yeah.
And spiders. I do find this hard to believe sometimes, but apparently it's so.
Yeah. So,
so you can relate, though. Was that a scary experience for you, having to do that?
I was literally wobbling. I felt as though I did okay, but I had no script. I just had to talk. And
I definitely think what you did there. You mean you didn't really have a choice, did you? But you got thrown in the deep end. But a part of that is what I coach is this first step. It's radical ownership.
Yeah.
We need to start to really understand like what is preventing us from achieving our goals. And for me in that moment, and not in that moment, but I recognized looking back all these times that I hadn't been successful, the common denominator was not communicating effectively.
Yes.
And it is a common case for many. So when we start to realize that actually it's communication, the thing that's standing in our way, then we have to take that first action. And probably for you, like that first time was scary, definitely. But
after that, nothing could be worse than that.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Everything else, I love it. I love getting out there and speaking in front of people and so on. And but you're right, a lot of people don't. And so to overcome that, if you were, I don't know whether you got 3 tips or 5 tips or whatever, but what are the things that people can do to be a better speaker?
Yeah. So like I said, first of all, it's really like understanding that is what you want to do, right? It's understanding. I think if you make something more compelling within yourself, then you're more likely to do it. So the very first step in all of the coaching and everything I do is objective setting. Like, what is it that you want to achieve? And like, there's many different forms of speaking as well, right? There's like speaking like we're doing now. There's speaking on a stage. Not everybody wants to speak on a stage, but there might be speaking just up in a meeting room. So what does that success look like for you, number one? And then what would it mean for you to achieve that success? And I think if you start to really feel that like, oh, yeah, this is going to be life changing, then you're always more compelled to do something when you kind of focus on that. And then in terms of speaking in general, it's also like understanding your downfalls, I guess, as a speaker as well. So or understanding who you are as a speaker. So there are 3 decision makers in our body. And this is normally where we speak from. So this is actually what I coach, is about state, flow state. And a lot of the time, what we do and why we're not great speakers is we don't believe that we're great speakers. And we probably tell ourselves as well, oh, I'm just not very good at this. I'm just not very good at this. I just don't like it. And we shy away from it. And in order to get us, what flow state means is ultimately a state of trust. It's like, think of a brand that you just love. It's a no-brainer for you. It's just an automatic buy because it just works for you. You don't even need to think about it, do you? It's just a belief state you get yourself into. So imagine if you got yourself into that belief state with your speaking. So if you just knew you were going to get up onto that stage and you were going to be awesome.
You're going to nail it. Yeah.
And that's, I guess, the really important thing as well is to get into that belief state, because when we speak, it's an energy exchange. And so what's really important is that we make our audience feel nice and relaxed. And again, like I said, have you ever heard a bad speaker, somebody who's not very good?
Yes.
And how does that make you feel?
Oh, just, it's almost, you just want to cringe, don't you? I think on one hand, you feel sorry for them. And then the other, you feel sorry for the audience and yourself. You just wish you could get up and leave, but you can't, because that would be
really. So there you go. You're feeling the energy exchange, because they are not having a great time. You also don't feel like you're having a great time. And that's really the key, is about getting ourselves into this state that I'm talking about, which is this nice, relaxed state. And so you look like you're having an enjoyable time, so you're transferring that energy. And when we transfer that energy, then people are more relaxed. They're more willing to take on your information that you're telling them. They're more likely to remember as well that information, which is important. Actually, only 10% of what we say is remembered. Can you believe that?
Wow.
It was smaller percentage than I would have liked. But it's not just about remembering what you're saying, it's actually the relaying of that information as well, isn't it? Making sure they go back to their business or back to their partner or back to whoever and talk about this amazing person, Steve Mills, that they heard speak earlier on the day. And in terms of that state then, so that's the importance of getting into that state. But in terms of getting into that state, it's about aligning these 3 decision centers in our body. And now you've probably heard people talk from one of these decision makers. So people who speak from their heart, they're, oh God, I've got to tell you about this thing. And it's very gushy. Yeah. You heard people talk, it's like a bit like, oh.
Yeah.
And then people who talk from their head brains, for example, they go, I was, and because they use these crutch words is what we call them, because they're thinking about what's the right thing to say next. And actually, like, what is the right thing? That's the question. It's actually, because you're an expert, otherwise you wouldn't be speaking on that topic. So what we do is help people align these 3 decision makers so that you become into this belief, this trust state. And what we look at is the communication you have with yourself as well, that I am not very good at, and use techniques to actually to reprogram ourselves in order to get ourselves to believe that we are really good at speaking.
Fantastic. Really good. So that's sort of covered speaking and communication, but I also wanted to talk to you about stories and how people can use those in business, because I really do think they're very powerful. And yet at the same time, if you ask me, do you have any great stories? I probably do. I mean, I told you one that was a bit interesting, possibly. But I'm not sure I'm using them in the full context of my business as well as I could. So why are stories so important? I suppose from a business point of view, what type of stories should people be telling?
Stories are so important. I'm doing a bit of a Steve Jobs today, and Steve Jobs is my favorite storyteller. And he said that the storyteller is the most powerful person in the room. And I totally believe it, because when we tell somebody facts and figures, I don't know about you, but when somebody starts listing off facts and figures, I am like ready for bed. But when somebody starts telling me a story, I'm engaged. And it is actually scientifically proven, because when we tell facts and figures, it only ignites 2 different parts of our brain. And when we tell stories, it ignites 7 different parts of our brain. So actually the neurons in our brains are firing. And what happens is we get these mirror neurons. So I start to synchronize with you. And have you ever had that thought of like, oh, we're on the same wavelength, me and you? Right. You've even probably said it. And that is literally a thing, because your wavelengths of your brain and mine.
You have a connection, you warm to that person, don't you?
That's it. And you are spot on. It's resonance. When we start to tell stories, and especially like in this day and age where the digital platforms have boomed and it's so easy to hide behind a screen, and you don't become a person anymore. You then just become this screen. So humanizing that, it actually makes it's far easier to do business. One of the courses I used to run was how do you land $1 million deal over VC? And that's it. It is through building that connection and that resonance and getting people to realize that you're human. So that's what in business, what I do 100%, all of my meetings and everything I do, I talk about professional vulnerability, leading with vulnerability and telling people a story about me that then they get a sense of who I am. They understand me. And maybe there's a bit in that story that they go, oh, I'm just like that as well. And then you go, oh, we're the same. And then you get that connection.
Vulnerability. I like that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, you don't want to like puke up all your trauma on the boardroom, do you? But you want to give people a sense of who you are.
I really like that. And so if somebody's listening today thinking, I like the idea of stories, how do I develop a story? What advice could you give in a few minutes for that, please?
Yeah, like you said, you've got many, right? You've got many
Yeah.
stories that can be searched. So I've got a black book normally beside my bed, because that's when, when we're relaxed, that's when the
Yeah.
best ideas on
Yeah.
holiday, when you
Yeah.
get into bed, the things where you should be sleeping. So
Yeah.
then writing all those stories down, taking a journal or a log, digitally, analog, whatever you'd like to do that. And then start to think about where those stories make sense, because they might be a really great example or an analogy for something. So I think actually, like, thinking about those stories and the context in which they will be relevant is probably the first thing. And then if you want to, I guess it depends what you want to do with that story, whether you want to build it out into a longer narrative. And then that's when in my coaching, what we do is, like, I just ask people to brain dump. It's like, tell me all the information you know about that thing, get it all out. And we create narratives out of that. But also, I think probably one of the hardest is to distill and make that story succinct with a really good punchline. Grab attention at the start. And I do think that, and actually in this day and age as well, grabbing attention. So what part of that story is the most compelling? And that's, we see this all the time on, like, social media. Clickbait is what it's called. Like the thing that gets people like, what do you mean by that?
What's it? Yeah. It's very, very powerful. And, again, from a marketing perspective, I'm always talking to people about the headlines that they use, whether it's on a web page, a blog, a video or whatever. And obviously a story as well is really important. And I see, on websites where people have a headline, which is basically on top of the story, called something like "Our Services," which is the story of the business, really, I suppose. And they can't think of anything more interesting than "Our Services." I'm sure there's to make it a little bit more interesting than just saying that. Even like "How we help you" might be better than "Our Services" or "What we do" or "About us." Because
you're so right in what you're saying. Yeah, it's everything, isn't it?
Nobody's interested in me or you or and particularly when they don't know us. Obviously, when they do, they're fascinated. But I think it's just on the written word, it's so important to try and grab that attention, because there's so many people trying to get that attention these days.
And we have to put our audience at the core of that. So actually, what the hook, right? So, like, what's in it for you, the audience? It's ultimately, like, me being a coach. The reason why I'm coaching is because I've got loads of great skills and knowledge and learnings from successes and a lot of failures as well. But that's the thing that people want to know. It's like, how do I not fail? How do I not do the silly things that you've done? Or how do I learn from the successes that you've also had?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've sadly come to the end of our time together. It's absolutely flown, and I really do appreciate your time being here. Just before we finish, if somebody wants to find out more about you and how you can help them or their business, what do they need to do?
100%. Thank you, firstly, as well. And it has flown. And if you want to find out more, definitely follow me, is what I'd say. So if you're on Instagram, it's I am Kate Munday, or Facebook as well, or LinkedIn. Get a feel for what I'm like. I think that's a first really important thing. Like you said, connection and that energy is really important. And if you want to go and find out a bit more about what I do, you can go to katemunday.com, as you can see on the screen, and you'll have a look there that I run workshops, one-to-one coaching, and I also run these kind of inspirational masterclasses as well. And you can give me an email and get in touch.
Great, fantastic. Thank you ever so much once again. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm sure you have. As I said, it seemed to go so quickly. I'm sure we could, maybe do this again at some point and really have a deep dive into a specific part of this, whether it's building stories or communicating your story or something like that. But for now, thank you ever so much, Kate. Really appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I do this every day, Monday to Friday, 12:30. If you want to come along to any of the sessions, please feel free to do so. And if I can help you, obviously go to my website, which is steve-mills.com. Thanks very much for listening, and speak to you next time.